Najpierw będzie po polsku, później po angielsku. Po angielsku postaram się dokonać podsumowania konferencji, ale najpierw chciałbym powiedzieć kilka słów po polsku i tu dziękuję panu profesorowi Wyżykowskiemu za inspirację, żeby to zrobić. Tylko, drodzy państwo, jeżeli spojrzymy na dzisiejszy program telewizyjny, to, drodzy państwo, możemy się dowiedzieć, że dzisiaj o godzinie 21 w telewizji polskiej, czyli w mediach publicznych, będzie film pod tytułem Sędziowie pod presją. Film, który opowiada o roli sędziów, którzy walczyli o niezależność sądownictwa, ale w tym filmie bierze udział dwójka, można powiedzieć, naturszczyków, nawet nie aktorów, bo jest to film dokumentalny. Pani mecenas Sylwia Gregorczyk-Abram i pan mecenas Michał Wawrykiewicz, którzy tam uzgadniają strategię procesową przed Trybunałem Sprawiedliwości Unii Europejskiej i w ogóle angażują się w bieżącą pomoc na rzecz sędziów, takich jak sędzia Tuleja, sędzia Zabudowska, sędzia Żurek i Juszczyszyn i wielu, wielu innych. Także i pani minister Eichhardt również jest w tym filmie jako faktycznie Pauliny jedynie chyba nie było, prawda, w filmie. Racja. Drodzy państwo, także, ale dlaczego o tym mówię? Ponieważ to jest na swój sposób symboliczne, tak, że w sumie dopiero teraz, tak minęło 1,5 roku, że w mediach publicznych możemy się zapoznać z dokumentem, który jest dokumentem tych właśnie czasów, które były czasami nietypowymi i że ten dokument jest w stanie trafić do szerokiej publiczności, bo wcześniej był pokazywany na różnych festiwalach, na różnych specjalnych pokazach. Pamiętam, wygrał festiwal Watch Dogs, a teraz jednak trafi do publicznego obiegu. Także, drodzy państwo, jeżeli państwo chcą kontynuować duch dzisiejszej konferencji, to godzina 21 TVP. Drodzy państwo, chciałbym, to zazwyczaj jest tak, że się dziękuję organizatorom na samym końcu, kiedy wszyscy są już znudzeni, także ja zacznę od tego, co jest najważniejsze. Chciałbym bardzo serdecznie podziękować wszystkim osobom, które były zaangażowane w przygotowanie tej dużej konferencji. Chciałbym podziękować tłumaczom za bardzo intensywną pracę, niskie ukłony za to, co państwo dla nas zrobili. Drodzy państwo, chciałbym podziękować Kancelarii Prezesa Rady Ministrów, zwłaszcza pani minister Magdalenie Sapkowiak-Czarneckiej, która koordynuje całość działań w ramach prezydencji, a także która nadzoruje Departament Przygotowania i Sprawowania Przewodnictwa w Radzie Unii Europejskiej. I w szczególności chciałbym podziękować pani Marcie Żurawek oraz pani Marzenie Krupińskiej, które są opiekunkami naszego spotkania. Dobrze. Chciałbym podziękować pani Dominice Ziętarze, mojej doradczyni, która moderowała i czuwała nad tym, żeby wszystko się odbyło zgodnie z kolejnością i tak jak trzeba. Bardzo dziękuję. Drodzy państwo, było tak, że każdy z paneli miał swojego opiekuna, opiekunkę merytorycznego, którzy spędzili naprawdę mnóstwo czasu nad tym, żeby gości zebrać, przedyskutować, przygotować wszystko i byli to pani Aleksandra Chudaś, pan Jacek Michałowski, pan profesor Jakub Urbanik i pan mecenas Adam Rogala-Lewicki. Bardzo dziękuję. Drodzy państwo, chciałbym podziękować również osobom odpowiedzialnym za kwestie organizacyjne z Departamentu Prawa Europejskiego w Ministerstwie Sprawiedliwości. I zanim wymienię komu, to jeszcze chciałbym powiedzieć, że, drodzy państwo, to był niezwykły wysiłek, ponieważ pracownicy Departamentu Prawa Europejskiego na co dzień się zajmują całym mnóstwem rzeczy związanych z prezydencją, z negocjowaniem kolejnych dokumentów, które przygotowujemy, z opiniowaniem różnych spraw, w których rząd polski przedstawia bądź nie przedstawia stanowisko przed Trybunałem Sprawiedliwości Unii Europejskiej. A tu nagle się pojawił minister, który pomyślał, że trzeba zrobić konferencję, która trochę nie do końca pasuje do takiego codziennego rytmu pracy Departamentu Prawa Europejskiego. Tym bardziej te podziękowania są większe. Także podziękowania na ręce pani dyrektor Małgorzaty Pawelec, pani naczelnik Małgorzaty Piguły, pani Katarzyny Kostałkowskiej, pani Joanny Sucheckiej, pani Jadwigi Fogiel, pani Anety Tomczak, pan Jakub Malec, był także zaangażowany pan Tomasz Białas i pan Bartosz Modzelewski. Bardzo serdecznie dziękuję. I drodzy państwo, chciałbym także podziękować pracownikom ministerstwa odpowiedzialnym za obsługę medialną, pani dyrektor Karolinie Wasilewskiej oraz jej całemu zespołowi, który tutaj obsługiwał całą konferencję, dzięki którym możemy się już później też dowiedzieć o tym wszystkim, co się stało. Dziękuję bardzo. I wreszcie, drodzy Państwo, dziękuję wszystkim osobom odpowiedzialnym za sprawy techniczne, za obsługę cateringową, kierowcom, oficerom łącznikowym. To jest zawsze wielki wysiłek, naprawdę moje wielkie podziękowania i ukłony. And now I will...
Huge effort. Thank you.
To English, I would like to thank also all the participants, all the speakers, all the moderators of today's and yesterday's conference. Thank you very much for sharing your knowledge, for sharing your experience, your remarks, and now I will try to do my best to summarize one of the major points of our discussion. So I think that the important point is where are we now, kind of setting the stage. And I think that after this conference, we know that we are not just after this so-called illiberal time in Poland, but the situation in other countries is still difficult, is becoming more and more difficult. And moreover, there are some new trends that may bring some, and they are bringing some negative results. And I would say that almost every day we observe or we learn about some new practices or new ideas to restrict the freedom of operation of the civil society. Moreover, we are risking the polarization in the civil society, and I think it is important to underline, I think it was Professor Kisilowski tried to underline this, that when we are talking about civil society, it is not only the civil society which is, let's say, pro-democratic, pro-European Union or pro-liberal, but it has many different dimensions. And as in consequence, we have to take it into account in the context of contemporary discussions and in the context of the polarization. There are also a number of external threats to the current democracy regime and situation due to social media disinformation, or of course Russian influence, but also development of new technologies, and also this security aspect comes here into play. And we see also that there are different new legislation pieces or practices that are threatening civil society and the operation of independent actors. So this notion of shrinking space for civil society is very much visible in a number of EU countries. But of course, diagnosis is there, but we have to think how to do and what to do with it. And for sure, it is important to think about this in the context of Article 2 of the Treaty on European Union. So to what extent the principle of supporting civil society is the part of European values. And here, we may say that, and it was the paper by Professor von Bogdandy, that this support or involvement of the Polish civil society under and the use of litigation under Article 2 and Article 19 of the treaty has contributed to shaping or strengthening the European civil society. I would like also to underline that we may see this emergence of transnational cooperation between civil society and judicial organizations as well as scholars. But I think that we should take a little bit more advantage of the concept of European citizenship and of all those different definitions of democracy that are contained in the Treaty on European Union. This value of deliberation and the value of participation in this European project. It is also important that we have different pieces of EU legislation that relates to the support of the civil society, or at least its individual members. European Union is right now working on the EU strategy for civil society. We have underlined a number of times the development of so-called European Democracy Shield. But the big question is how to strengthen the EU law as regards development of the civil society, how to promote it in a good way, but at the same time, how to get out of the conundrum that because quite often there is this vision that supporting means more money, but the question of having more money should not mean restricting the independence of the civil society. And I think example by or idea by Professor von Bogdandy was quite interesting, to what extent some good practices, like for example this 1% in Poland, Slovakia, could be promoted to other EU countries, and to what extent that kind of a mechanism could could be elevated to the EU level. And I think it was quite visible yesterday that it should be the role of the state as well as the EU to secure vibrant civil society, and this securing should be not in a way of overtaking civil society, but rather taking care of it, not for the sake of supporting civil society as such, but because the civil society is needed to defend the democracy. I think that was the statement by Ewa Kulik-Bielińska. Of course, when we think about civil society, we should look at it in a broad way, not just typical traditional NGOs, but we should take into account the relationship with media, with individual journalists, with watchdog organizations, with academia, with professional associations, especially bar association or attorneys at law associations, as well with the role, we should take into account the role of the ombudsman organizations and equality bodies. And here, I think it is worth mentioning that we see quite interesting interplay between, on the one hand, EU law, and on the other hand, different soft law instruments that are developed by other international organizations, such as OSCE, Venice Commission, or the Council of Europe. And I think that is always needed, and that was quite often missing in the context of the development of the EU law, this kind of a searching for synergies, for exchange of good practices, or taking advantage of existing good instruments in other international organizations that could be taken to the benefit of the operation of the EU. Coming back to funding, it does not mean that the EU should just promote some, future instrument of supporting independent civil society, but surely we should think what is the role of CERF, how the multi-annual framework for next years will be framed in the context of the supporting of civil society, especially when we are treating civil society as a core European value. And also, it seems that EU should appreciate more the role of the civil society in terms of impact on legislation, on the quality of governance, on checking the way how different institutions operate, but also such activities like role of NGOs in fact-checking or cooperation with government in different policies, including defense policies. And here, I think the example from Estonia was very much relevant. When it comes to protection from undue pressure of civil society, I think that on the one hand, we have some new legislative acts that are adopted, that are in the process of implementation, with the most notable example of the anti-SLAPP directive. And for sure, we should take care that it is not implemented in a purely formal way, but like using the very substance and idea of why we should protect people from this undue SLAPP legislation. SLAPP litigation, that also we should take more care about access to public media and think about the role which public media play in the context of contemporary democracy. But I really like those comments concerning the support to individual defenders, activists, in terms of psychological, legal support to them, including protection against cyber violence. And here, I think we have some special groups of defenders, of activists that are especially or additionally vulnerable, and that's why they should be protected from that kind of threats. We had a very interesting panel on civic education, and I think to be honest, I think it was one of the very, very first panels in Poland in which this idea of the civic education as the new program in schools has been presented. And I think what we can read from this panel is this understanding that civic education should not be just a subject that is taught by teachers in schools, but we should create forms of cooperation between just civil society, professional associations, and teachers, also using our good Polish examples, but also promoting this example to other countries and taking advantage of some interesting experiences from other countries. The debate on academic freedom was. I really like this comment in the beginning that most probably if we would meet just in January debating academic freedom, this debate would be completely different than it is now, when almost every day we may read that so-called big brother or big uncle is creating some kind of daily threats to the academic freedom. And it is important to underline that you cannot practice academic freedom without institutional security and autonomy of institutions. And that's why those institutions should be protected on the one hand, but also they have an important role to play in terms of promoting values of democracy and the rule of law. And I remember one of the comments is that if we think about so-called commercialization of research and innovation, that universities should be divided into those departments that are, let's say, earning money and those that are dealing with humanities, which means they are not earning enough money. That is one of the major threats for the existence and for the future of universities. So we should never allow for that kind of a thinking, because it would mean sooner or later destruction of the role that is played by those humanities departments of the universities in the context of some populistic movements. And here, once again, soft law instruments play an important role, and also we should not forget about it, the conditionality policy by the European Union, that could be an important instrument of protecting university independence. When it comes to the role of lawyers, I think all the panelists underlined that lawyers, judges, barristers, legal advisors, prosecutors have much more important role to play than just like daily exercise of their profession. Then their involvement in supporting values of democracy and the rule of law is more than important. I think we are all happy that the Convention on Protection of Lawyers would be signed within 3 weeks in Luxembourg, and it seems Poland will be one of those countries that is signing as one of the first countries this international convention. I'm happy to announce that Ministry of Justice will be represented by Maria Eichhardt, Deputy Minister of Justice. So 13th of May, Luxembourg. And let's try to promote this convention to that extent that it will be ratified soon by a sufficient number of states, because it really creates a lot of interesting instruments supporting bar independence and individual lawyers. And in this context, we should not forget different examples of threats, pressure relating to lawyers, and some of those cases are still subject of investigation, such as the use of the Pegasus spyware against judges, prosecutors, and attorneys, but also activists in Poland. Ladies and gentlemen, when it comes to ombudsman and equality bodies, I think it's quite interesting that we meet at a time that when we are facing the new reform in Poland, but not only in Poland, but also in other member states, because more or less by the mid of 2026, we have to implement the directive on equality bodies. And this directive requires establishment or existence of independent equality bodies. And it is quite interesting to look into this directive, because it provides directly the need to cooperate with civil society. I would like to quote you Article 14 of the directive. Member states shall ensure that equality bodies have appropriate mechanisms in place to cooperate within their respective fields of competence with other equality bodies within the same member state, and with relevant public and private entities, including labor inspectorates, social partners, and civil society organizations. And I've checked that civil society appears 7 times in this directive, which means that it is the way how to, let's say, incorporate the proper role of the civil society in this institutional cooperation. And I do believe that it is one of the important aspects of strengthening not only equality bodies but also civil society organizations. But surely, what is important in the context of any ombudsman, national human rights institutions, or equality bodies is independence. And second, independence means also proper but sometimes quite creative, and I look at Professor Łętowska, very creative use of existing instruments in order to really contribute to the public debate. And ladies and gentlemen, finally, I think that in Poland, we were fortunate enough that after '89, a lot of stakeholders, a lot of actors spent a lot of time on developing civil society. It was not only part of Poland, it was also part of other Central European countries. When I've listened to Marta Pardavi, I remember how Hungarian Helsinki Committee was developing, how people from the Helsinki Committee in Hungary, in Bulgaria, in Romania, later on moved to different organizations. Some of them became judges of the European Court of Human Rights or the Court of Justice of the EU. Some of them became scholars. They established their own NGOs. So I think that I wouldn't say, and I would not agree, if I may, with Łukasz Bojarski that it is a Polish model. I would even say that we have more or less like the Central European model of the development of the civil society. We are, I would say, fortunate enough that we could use this experience in order to create this connection with judges here. But let's look at Slovakia. Slovakia is also having quite interesting examples of fighting against corruption or fighting for the against environmental change. Or let's look right now into Serbia, Montenegro. We have a lot of, I think, interesting examples from Central and Eastern Europe. But my question is whether the same examples are coming from Western, so-called Western Europe. That is, I think, interesting question, because we see that the tradition is a little bit different, but the question is that in case of trouble, whether their NGOs are ready enough to fight for the same for the same values. So surely our discussion is about this very interesting cooperation between member states and civil society, and also, once again, to what extent EU might be this kind of independent agent supporting civil society, but also supporting the value of democracy in itself. Ladies and gentlemen, to conclude, I would like to underline that usually that kind of conferences end up with a statement that, okay, it was interesting conference and inspired the debate, and we'll prepare some kind of a publication, and it's the effort of that kind of event. But here, I'm in institutional governmental position, and basically we are still having presidency, okay? We are still having 10 weeks in order to use this time of presidency in order to shape the debate along the lines that have been proposed during the conference. So we hope that conclusions from this conference would have strong impact on the European democracy shield, and that number of points will be taken by the Polish government, not only in the context of the presidency, but beyond the presidency, in the context of the future cooperation at the EU level, but also with accession countries. So for me, so maybe for many of you, this conference, I hope so, was inspiration. For us, it is simply a further duty to act and to work. Thank you very much.